Creek Studios.
As Silas finished his shift in the mine, he was not thinking about coal. He was thinking about home, about his wife, about a name and a face that he couldn't get out of his mind. And somewhere between the dark of that mine and the road back to camp, something in him finally broke. What happened next would leave one man dead, one family ruined, and a holler in Harlan County, Kentucky, carrying stories for generations. Before we get into this episode, if you're drawn to true stories from Appalachia, the kind rooted in history, folklore, crime, and things that people don't always say out loud, then you're in the right place. This is Roots and Shadows, the Real Appalachia Podcast. We release new episodes every Saturday, and if you decide to stay, go ahead and press that follow button. That way these stories don't have to come looking for you. Before we get into that holler, we need to talk about Harlan, because this story does not come out of nowhere. It comes out of coal country. Harlan County sits down in the southeastern part of Kentucky, tucked deep into steep ridges, narrow roads, and deep hollers. By the early 1900s, coal had become more than an industry there. It had become the life of the place. Men not only came from Kentucky, but Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and further away, looking for work that was dangerous, hard, and sometimes the only work man could find. When the mines came, the coal camps came with them. The company often owned the mine, the houses, and the store, and a family's whole life could be tied to that operation. Roads were rough. Automobiles were not common for every family, and miners needed to live close to the tipple, the tracks, and the mouth of the mine. That closeness matters, because in a coal camp people knew each other. They knew who was working, who was sick, who was late coming home, and who had been seen talking where maybe they should not be talking. In a place like that, stories could travel fast. Sometimes truth traveled, but mostly it was the gossip that traveled even faster. Harlan would become known for conflict. In the 1930s, as miners tried to organize for better wages and working conditions, the county became one of the most violent labor battlegrounds in America. It would become known as Bloody Harlan. Now, Bloody Harlan deserves his own episode. But for this story, you just need to understand that the legend grew out of a hard world where coal, pressure, and fear were part of daily life. And amongst all that is a holler, known locally as Red Dog Holler. And the name itself sounds like something out of a ghost story. Red Dog Holler. You hear that, and you might picture an old hound with glowing red eyes standing in the road, or some black dog legend turned red by the coal dust. But from what I can find, Red Dog was not named for a dog at all. Red Dog was slang for coal waste material, reddish, rough, and leftover from the mining process. In places where roads were dirt and gravel, people used what they had, and what they had was coal, rock, shale, and waste from the very industry that built those camps. So Red Dog Holler was not just a name, it was a road marked by coal, a road made from what the mountain gave up. And according to legend, somewhere along that road, in one of those coal camp communities, a miner carried something out of the dark that will leave that holler with stories for generations. To understand why a story like this could grow in Red Dog Holler, picture one of those coal camp communities tucked close to the mine. Morning came early. Men stepped out before daylight with dinner buckets and work clothes that never really came clean. Women kept the homes going, raised children, washed coal-black clothes, and listened for word from the mine. Children grew up knowing the sound of coal cars, boots on porches, and worry in their mothers' voices. That kind of closeness could build community, but it could also build pressure. A look on a porch before a conversation. A man stopping by a house became something people talked about, and once a story started moving through the camp, it was hard to stop. That is where the legend brings in Silas. Silas was not a rich man. He was not a powerful man. He was one of the men who went underground and came home with the mountain still on him. Coal dust in the lines of his hands, coal dust around his eyes, coal dust in his clothes. No matter how hard his wife tried to wash it out. Silas had not been right for a while. Something happened to him down in the mine. One day, while he was working deep under the mountain, his pick struck something that did not sound like coal. It gave off a different kind of ring, sharp and strange, enough to make the other men look over towards him. Silas cleared the dust away and saw what looked like a pale stone buried in the seam. It looked like quartz. It had a glow to it, like it had been waiting in that dark place for a very long time. He reached for it, and that's when the mountain responded. There was a blast, or a cave-in, or some kind of sudden violence deep in the mountain. Men who had been working near him did not make it out. But Silas did. And not only did he survive, but he came out basically untouched, unscathed, not a scratch on him, which in itself began raising some suspicion among the other miners. Exactly what did happen down there that day? After that day in the mine, Silas was not the same man. At first, his wife thought it was just the accident. A man does not walk away from something like that and come home unchanged. Not when his co-workers, fellow miners, did not come home at all. She gave him some space. She tried not to ask too many questions. She told the children to be easy around their father because he had been through something terrible. But whatever had followed Silas out of that mine didn't stay quiet. It started small, a thought here, a whisper there, a look from another man that seemed to last too long. Then came the talk. Another miner put the idea in Silas's head. The men in the camp were already gossiping. But nobody had to tell him anything, because the thing working on his mind was doing enough talking all by itself. But somewhere along the way, Silas came to believe that while he was underground, while he was breathing coal dust and swinging a pick and trying to bring home enough money to feed the family, another man was stepping on to his front porch. Another man was speaking to his wife. Another man was sitting in the place that belonged to him. And whether it happened or only happened in his mind, by the time Silas believed it, it had already become real enough to ruin lives. He carried that thought into the mine. He carried it back out. He carried it down the road toward home. And one evening, it sat down at the supper table with him. His wife had fixed a meal like she always did. The children were at the table. Silas sat there with his plate in front of him. At first, he ate like any other man who had come home hungry from work. Then his fork started hitting the plate hard and harder. Not much at first, just enough for his wife to notice. Metal against the plate. Again and again, she looked over at him and said his name, Silas. He did not answer. He just kept eating. The children looked up. His wife watched him for a minute, trying to understand what she was seeing. His eyes were open, but they were not really in that room. They were somewhere else. Somewhere dark. Somewhere deep under the mountain. Somewhere in that place between what a man knows and what a man fears. The fork hit the plate again, louder this time. His wife said louder, Silas, what is wrong with you? Still nothing. He lifted the fork to his mouth, but there was no food left on it. Then he did it again and again. The plate was empty, but Silas kept scraping it, all like he was eating, like he did not even know the food was gone. One of the children began to cry. That sound seemed to pull him back, but only halfway. He looked up at his wife, and for a second, maybe she saw something in him she had not seen before. Not anger exactly, not yet. Something worse than anger. A man listening to a voice nobody else could hear. She asked him again what was wrong. Silas abruptly stands up and pushes back from the table. He did not tell her. He did not ask. He did not say the name that had been burning in his mind. He just stood there for a moment, breathing hard, while his family sat frozen around the table. Then he simply said he was going to bed. Because morning came early. and the mine would be waiting. The next morning, Silas went back to the mine. His wife had packed his dinner bucket, like she always did. She watched him a little closer that morning. She just wanted to ask him again what had been wrong the night before, but the words never came out of her mouth. In a coal camp, morning was not a time for long conversations. Men had to get to work. Children had to be tended to. Fires had to be kept going. Food had to stretch for another day. So Silas took his dinner bucket and made that trip to the mine. He walked that road, and with the same thought still working on him. Only now, it was not just a thought. It had a name. Maybe someone had spoken it. Maybe Silas had guessed it. Maybe the thing that followed him out of that mine had put the name there itself. But by the time he reached the mouth of the mine, Silas believed he knew who had been coming around his house. A younger man, a man named Edwin, who worked at the company store as a clerk. A treasured job within the camp that was relatively clean compared to the dark, dirty job of a miner. Now Edwin fell into this job because his uncle was the co-operator, or the owner of the mine. Edwin was somebody Silas had seen around the camp, somebody who smiled too easy and looked away too fast. Down in the mine, the work started like it always did. The dark swallowed the men up. The lamps came on. The tools began ringing against the coal. But Silas was struggling that day. Every sound seemed too sharp. Every laugh seemed aimed at him. Every word from another man seemed like it had a meaning behind it. And the more he tried to push the thought away, the louder it got. Then the other men started in. They were only joking. But they did not know how close Silas was to the edge. Maybe they knew exactly what they were doing, because men can be cruel when they think another man's pain is something to laugh at. One of them said something about Silas's house. Another one just laughed. Somebody said that while Silas was down there working, another man might be keeping his wife warm by the fire. And that was all it took. Silas stopped swinging his pick. The sound of the mine went on around him, but he stood still. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then somebody laughed again. Silas, quietly and slowly, laid down his tools. But not all his tools. He kept his pick. One of the men asked him where he was going. Silas did not answer. Another man told him he could not leave before his shift was over. Still nothing. His foreman warned him that if he walked out, he might not have a job to come back to. But by then, Silas was past worrying about work, past worrying about the company, past worrying about anything except the picture burning in his mind. A picture of another man enjoying the company of his wife. So Silas left the mine before his shift was over. So he walked the dark passage back toward daylight, and Silas came out different than when he went in. The sun would have been hard on his eyes. The air would have felt too open after the mine. But he did not stop. He walked down towards the camp, carrying the weight of every whisper, every laugh, every thought that had been eating at him. And somewhere between the mouth of that mine and the road back home, Silas made up his mind. He was not going to ask. He was not going to wait any longer. He was not going to let the truth come out on its own. He was going to go find the man he believed had ruined him. And in that moment, Red Dog Holler stopped being just another coal camp road. It became the path to something that could not be undone. Silas knew where the young man lived. That is one of the things that makes coal camp different from other places. You did not have to wonder where somebody stayed. You knew. Everybody knew. The houses were close. The paths were familiar. A man could walk from the mine to another man's door without thinking much about where his feet was carrying him. And that is exactly what Silas did. He went straight to the house of the man whose name had been burning in his mind. The young man was barely old enough to be called a man, younger than Silas, strong-backed, and too careless with his smiles. And Silas came to that man's door carrying the mine with him. Coal dust on his clothes, on his face, and in his hands the tool he had carried out of the dark. The young man looked up and saw Silas standing there. He tried to smile. He called him by name. He said, "Silas, what are you doing here?" And Silas said the words he had been carrying all morning. "I know." That was all. Just 2 words. The young man did not understand, or maybe he understood enough to know he was in danger. He backed away and told Silas he had it wrong. He said he did not know what Silas was talking about. He said he had not done anything, but Silas was not hearing him. By then, the rumor had become truth in his mind. The laughing in the mine from his co-workers, the empty plate the night before, the looks, the name he had turned over and over in his mind, all of it built into something that could no longer be reasoned with. The young man said it again. "You've got the wrong man." But those words came just a little too late. Silas raised the pick, and when it was over, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something terrible has happened and the world has not yet figured out how to make a sound again. For a moment, Silas just stood there. That was when the thing that had a hold of him finally let him go. He saw the young man not as an enemy, not as a face in his mind, not as the man from the rumor, but as somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody who had looked at him and said, "You've got the wrong man." Then the camp began to stir. A neighbor heard something. A woman stepped out on a porch. Somebody yelled for help. And before long, the story had begun moving through Red Dog Holler faster than any person could carry it. Silas had killed a man. But the worst part of the legend was still coming. Because by the time the truth made its way back to him, it was already too late. The truth did not come like thunder. It came the way truth often does after something terrible has already happened. Too slow. Too late. It came from somebody in the camp who finally spoke up. It came from his wife, standing there broken and terrified, telling Silas what he should have asked before he ever lifted that pick. It came from the same men who had laughed down in the mine, suddenly not laughing anymore, when they realized what their words had helped set loose. The truth found Silas. The young man he killed had not been the right man. Because there had been no man at all. Only suspicion. Only gossip. Only the kind of thought that gets planted in a man's mind and grows there until it chokes out everything else. And that is the part of the legend that makes it more than just a ghost story. Because the haunting does not begin with the dead man walking the road. It begins with Silas realizing what he had done. He had not defended his home. He had not exposed some terrible betrayal. He had not made things right. He had killed an innocent man. A man who had begged him to listen. A man who had told him, right there at the end, that he had the wrong man. And now, there was no way to undo it. The camp that had been noisy with talk went in a different way after that, because the story had changed. It was not funny anymore. It was not gossip anymore. It was blood on the floor of a coal camp house, and a family somewhere waiting on a boy who would never come home. As for Silas, he ran into the mountain and was never seen again. But the dead man never left Red Dog Holler. Because, according to Appalachian legend, when a man dies with the truth still trapped in his mouth, people say the place remembers. And Red Dog Holler remembered. People say that something didn't just happen there. They say something is still there. Over the years, the stories tied to that road have taken on a life of their own. If you go there at night, at the right time, you may see one of the small lights moving through the woods. Not headlights, not a porch light, but something like an old miner's lamp bobbing along in the dark. The lights move up the mountain, one after another, almost like a line of men climbing through the dark. In a place like Harlan, a light in the dark means something. A miner's lamp once meant the difference between seeing the next step and being swallowed up by the mountain. And then there are the footsteps, that near a fork in the road, if you stop and listen, you can hear something moving in the woods beside you. When you stop, it stops. When you move, it moves. And then there is the shadow figure. Not clear enough to describe, just a dark shape in a darker place, standing near the trees, or crossing far enough ahead that by the time your headlights catch up, there is nothing there. Depending on who tells it, that figure changes. Some say it is the young man Silas killed. Some say it is Silas himself. And some say it is what came out of the mine with him, still wandering Red Dog Holler and still feeding on fear. One story told about Red Dog Holler sounds like the kind of thing that could happen anywhere in these mountains, but it carries that same old uneasiness. There was a man out coon hunting one night with a couple of his buddies. They had split up in the woods, the way hunters sometimes do, listening for the dogs and trying to keep track of one another by sound and by light. It was dark enough that the trees all ran together, and every little noise seemed to come from somewhere different than it really did. The man was making his way along when he saw a light moving up ahead through the woods. At first, he did not think much about it. He figured it was one of his buddies. He hollered at him, but the light kept moving. He called out again, louder this time. Still nothing. No answer. No voice coming back through the woods. Just that light moving along like somebody carrying a lantern or a headlamp, steady and quiet, weaving between the trees. The hunter started walking towards it, thinking maybe his friend had not heard him. But the closer he tried to get, the further away the light seemed to be. It never hurried. It never stopped. It just kept moving through the dark, always just far enough ahead that he could see it, but never close enough to catch it. Finally, it slipped farther up the mountain and disappeared. By then, the man had lost the mood for hunting. He worked his way back towards the truck, expecting to find at least one of his buddies still out in the woods. But when he got there, they were already waiting on him. Both of them. They had been there at the truck for a while, and neither one of them had been carrying that light. And then more recently, another story has a modern feel to it. A couple of people had gone up around Red Dog Holler after hearing the stories. Not to bother anything, not to tear anything up, just curiosity getting the better of them. They had heard about the lights, heard about the figure in the road, and like a lot of folks do, they wanted to see whether there was anything to it. They drove slow because the road was rough, and because once you get up in country like that after dark, you don't know what's around the next curve. The woods were tight against the road. Their headlights caught tree trunks, brush, old cuts in the bank, and then nothing but dark beyond it. One of them had their phone out, recording through the windshield, laughing a little at first, trying to make light of the whole situation. Then the driver said, "I see something up ahead." Not an animal, not a person exactly, just a dark shape standing near the edge of the road. At first, they thought maybe it was a man, maybe somebody walking, maybe somebody who lived nearby and had no idea that they were about to scare two strangers half to death. The driver slowed. The shape did not move. The passenger stopped laughing. The headlights came closer, and for a second, it looked like the figure was standing with his head turned towards the vehicle. Then it was gone. Not walking away, not ducking into the trees, just gone. They stopped the vehicle and sat there with the engine running, both of them looking at the same empty piece of road ahead. The passenger checked the phone, thinking maybe they had caught it on video, but the phone had stopped recording. Not after the figure disappeared, before it, right before they reached the bend in the road. Now, maybe the phone glitched. Phones do that. Maybe the shadow was a tree, or fog, or the mind making something out of nothing because they had gone looking for a ghost story. But according to the way that story gets told, they turned around right there, and when they got back down off the mountain, there was red dust on the side of the vehicle. Only one side, the side facing the woods. Now whether Red Dog Holler is haunted by a dead man, a guilty man, or only by the stories people keep telling, one thing is certain. That road has carried more than coal dust. It has carried a warning. Be careful what you believe. Be careful what you repeat. And be careful what you let follow you home from the dark. But Red Dog Holler is not only tied to folklore. There is another story connected to that mountain road, and this one is not a legend. It has a date. It has a grave. And for almost 50 years, it had no name. So before we leave Harlan County, we need to talk about the young woman people once knew only as Mountain Jane Doe. In June of 1969, a body was found in Harlan, Kentucky, near Little Shepherd Trail. She was young, she had been killed, and nobody knew who she was. When a name is lost, there is another kind of death that happens in the records, in the newspaper, on the grave marker, and in the way people talk about the case for years later. For nearly 50 years, that's all anybody ever knew her by. Then, many years later, a daughter started asking questions and believed Mountain Jane Doe could possibly be her mother. That mother was Sonia Blair Adams. Through DNA, Mountain Jane Doe finally had her name returned, and it was indeed Sonia Blair Adams. That matters, because when we talk about old crimes in places already wrapped in folklore, it's easy for a real person to become part of the scenery. But Sonia was not a shadow. She was not just a case, she was somebody. Even though her name was restored, the full truth of what happened to her has not been. Her killer was never brought fully into the light. And that leaves Harlan County with two kinds of stories. One is folklore, a minor, a rumor, a wrong man, and lights that still move through the trees. The other is history, a crime, a young woman found murdered, buried without her name, and identified almost half a century later by the love and persistence of family. Some stories haunt a place because they are told. Others haunt it because they were never fully answered. So maybe Red Dog Holler is haunted. Maybe those lights are only headlights bending through fog. Maybe the footsteps are leaves shifting in the dark. Maybe the shadow in the road is what your mind creates when you already know the story before you get there. Or maybe the mountain remembers. Harlan County has carried a lot through the years. Coal, conflict, work, loss, songs, and stories. And Red Dog Holler, whether you believe the legend or not, leaves us with something worth thinking about. A whisper can ruin a life. A suspicion can become a weapon. And sometimes the stories people tell after dark are not just meant to scare us. Sometimes they are meant to warn us. Because in Appalachia, the past does not always stay behind us. Sometimes it walks the road. Sometimes it moves through the trees like a miner's lamp. And sometimes, after years of being buried under silence, it finally gets its name back. This has been Roots and Shadows, the Real Appalachia Podcast, where every root tells a story and every shadow hides one. As a reminder, these stories are drawn from public records, historical reporting, and conversations passed down through families, neighbors, and memories. Some names have been changed, and where the written record goes quiet, details have been carefully dramatized for storytelling.